Screen? This is, yeah, this is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, certainly so.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is our Wednesday, March 9th, special meeting of the Scarborough Town Council. Call this meeting to order, and if we'd rise to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tony, would you call the roll call?
Council Seither.
Here.
Council Anderson.
Here.
Council Paul Johnson.
Here.
Council Katarina.
Here.
Council Hamel.
Here.
Council Ken Johnson.
Yes.
And Chairman Cliff.
Here. Now, we're here for a single action item And just so the public knows, this is going to run directly into a charter commission work or committee workshop that is planned to follow immediately after this. So if you're watching on TV, the charter commission work will start immediately after this special meeting. The first item of business is order number 22-022, act to authorize the town manager in consultation with council leadership to leverage town and hired resources to draft ordinance amendments and mutually agreeable contract language with Crossroad Holdings LLC for the purpose of exempting up to 430 dwelling units over 5 years, generally consistent with the following conditions. First, exempted dwelling units will be located in multifamily or mixed-use buildings that are constructed within the town center, downtown of the Crossroads Plan Development District as identified within the exemption application. The development will be similar to that which was presented to the Scarborough Town Council on February 9th, 2022. And ordinance amendments will include performance standards or benchmarks to guide planning and development. Third, the provision or transfer of land for a town-funded community center and school or other items or factors that may be negotiated and deemed to be in the best interests of the town. Fourth is public benefits compliance factors, as were provided by Crossroads Holdings LLC in its application for an exemption to Scarborough's growth management ordinance in their February 9th, 2022 supplemental submission. And finally, actions contemplated in this authorization shall be subject to approval by the town council. So that's the way the order actually reads. We are, and this is somewhat unorthodox to add this step to the process, but we've been reviewing the Scarborough Downs request for an exemption. They submitted it, I think, in late October. We've had a number of workshops, and a few times, I think I've told the council, are you ready to support what they've requested? And the answer's been unanimously no. Same time, I've also asked, are you ready to vote it down? And the answer's been unanimously no. So that means that we need to find some middle ground. And right now, it's time, I think, to take it out of the political realm and move it to the professional realm. The people on the side of the table that are getting paid more than $1,500 a year, to see if there's something that is tangible that can be supported by the council. And so that's the reason I called the meeting. I feel like where we're at right here is a consensus of the council. It's not, we're left or right. It's a centrist estimate. That doesn't mean it will be supported by everybody either today or with what comes back to us in the end. But I thought it was important to hold ourselves accountable, to hold the Downs accountable, because who knows where these things go, and we don't need to be the scapegoat. The town council let us do this. I think from our perspective, these are reasonable terms, not clearly articulated, that need to be further fleshed out. With that, I'm going to open it up to public comment, and we have received a few via email that I'll read, and then if anybody in person or online would like to comment, they're welcome to as well. The first is going to be from Dan Bacon, who works with Crossroads Holdings. And he wanted to comment on behalf of Crossroads Holdings and the Downs project. I wanted to thank the town council and town manager for your continued time and effort on this exemption initiative. Following tonight's action, we look forward to further collaboration on this important town center initiative for both the project and the town. Sincerely, Dan. Next was from John Krasnick, who is the, well, I'll read it. It'll tell you who he is. So good evening. My name is John Krasnick. I live at 12 Evergreen Farms Road, and I currently serve as chair of the Scarborough Economic Development Corporation. Our primary mission is to develop, support, and promote sustainable economic development practices leading to a healthy, diverse, and resilient local economy. On behalf of our board of directors, I would like to state our support for the council's willingness to move the negotiation process forward on the exemption. The current projects being considered at the Downs have the potential to accomplish many of the economic development goals that have been set forth by town residents, committees, and officials, and we applaud the council's effort to negotiate on this matter and start the conversation to pursue the right pace of development. With that, is there anybody either here or on Zoom that would like to comment for this agenda item? Come on up, Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue, and I wasn't planning on being here for this. I thought I'd come and listen to the charter conversation this evening since I served on the charter committee. But, and I have to apologize. I've been out of town for a couple of days, so I really haven't prepared very well to speak to this, but I do feel that, well, I guess the first question is, what does this obligate anybody to? Meaning the town, or, you know, if this is something that we would have to do. I truly feel it's putting the cart before the horse. That in the presentation, the workshop where they did the presentation of the town center, there was a placeholder for a community center. We have no idea, other than what Mr. Hall described. It's 36 to 38,000 square feet. What does it do? What does it comprise of? And why are we giving away exemptions for something that we don't even know what it is on land that the town doesn't own? So it's the cart before the horse. And I don't think that this is something that we should be moving forward with until the whole idea of the community center goes to the town for referendum, because the money that was earmarked as found money, as sheltered money, is still taxpayer money. And we shouldn't be spending it, or we shouldn't be obligating ourselves to build something on somebody else's property until the taxpayers approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so a couple of good questions, Ms. Bristol. This is more of a symbolic action item today. It doesn't obligate us to do anything other than to try to come up with some language that could be brought back to the town council. Doesn't require us to really to do anything. It's more of an expression of these are things that we think are reasonable. Somebody else needs to work through the details before we can formally vote on them. So that's the best answer that I can give to that. Anybody else would like to respond to the public comment? Councilor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Allison, I just want to let you know that the community center, the benefit of the town on this, part of our GMO has got an exemption clause. And in order to meet the requirements for an exemption, there's quite a lengthy criteria to meet, on top of also a public benefit. Okay. Part of this exemption in our requirements, my requirement personally, is the land for the community center, regardless of the community center is built or not. So there's no commitment there at all. One of the requirements from me, from the developer seeking this exemption, is I want gifted land for the community center for which time in the future that the voter has full control over, that we do build or we don't build. So there's no commitment on this. And this action really is just to continue the conversation. Doesn't mean we're approving the exemption. I don't see a vote on an exemption for months in the future, because there's still a lot of work to do. So I know it may seem the cart's before the horse. We're just trying to keep the ball rolling. And I don't want it to be perceived that we're in favor of anything or not. It's just the conversation needs to happen. We're getting very little information. So we're kind of, as my friend Counselor Hamill says, pulling it through a knothole and just forcing the conversation. That's all this is.
Any others? Councilor Hamill.
Yeah, so I want to respond to your response. So this is not really, you said this is symbolic. How can an action item be symbolic? Okay, an action item requires us to act, to approve. And the actual document that we're approving, I have grave concerns about. And we've expressed these in various ways. But if you look at the actual document, it doesn't include any of the mandatory language that.
Councilor Hamill, it sounds like we're getting into discussion. Why don't we
Oh,
put
is
it on
it
the,
too early for that?
why don't we put it on the floor, and then we'll all have an opportunity.
I'll reserve my comments for later.
Very
It's a
well.
symbolic gesture.
Any other responses to the public comment? You'll be back. Okay. Very well. Councilor Johnson.
No.
Oh.
I'm just double checking to see.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Seeing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second. None.
Any discussion? And I'm going to give you preference, Councilor Hamill.
Thank you very much. That was fast. And how we got here was fast. So I applaud the efforts of the council. I participated in them in various ways and energetically, along with others. So I know we have strong opinions on it. And there's a tremendous desire to want to be part of progress, right? To vote in favor of something to advance the process. So, but what we have before us is actually a vote to authorize. Okay, it's a special meeting that came up quickly without any real notification, any real advance notice, came up quickly. And it's not a workshop, it's an action item that requires a simple majority. And I'm concerned that because of that act alone, we're somehow getting off on a tangent. That we're somehow substituting this approval of language and authorizing the town manager and a negotiator to begin negotiations when we haven't really confirmed our bargaining goals, although we've said we have demands and we have certain things we want to see, but we haven't reached any real agreement. I mean, if you use this in any type of negotiation as a guide, we basically have given our position of what we'd be willing to agree to in terms of a number of permits, even though the applicant has not been specific about a defined number. We've already said, here's what we can be willing to agree to. We've said that in that item. So I'm concerned that if we actually approve this thing, it might lead us down a path where we could simply subvert or not follow precisely the three-step process of the contract zone amendment ordinance. And I don't think we should do anything that would divert us from that process. I think this thing should be scrapped, and I believe that we should go back to the original path and follow through on evaluating the application strictly according to the process and the requirements of the contract zone amendment.
Councilor Caterina.
Yeah, with all due respect to my fellow councilor, Christine Hamel.
That's a windup, by the way, with
No,
all
it
due
is. not.
respect.
So, okay, so I like what we're doing tonight because it at least gets the ball rolling. And I don't think we're giving away anything that people don't already know anyway. And unless someone comes forward with something to negotiate, then you're just sitting there looking at each other. So if you notice, if you go down through the order, it's 430 dwelling units over 5 years, which is 86 per year, which isn't an outrageous amount, in my opinion, particularly given what we're trying to accomplish at the Downs. The exempted dwelling units will be located within multifamily or mixed-use buildings, so they aren't single-family houses. And I'll remind folks that, you know, the builder can go ahead and build single-family homes all day long if they want to in there, because there's nothing to stop them. Other than we do have an agreement with them that they wouldn't do that. Development will be similar to that presented to the council. And then we're gonna have, and I was happy to see this because it's my thing, is performance standards and benchmarks to guide the planning and development. There will be a a provision for a transfer of land for town-funded community center and school or other items or factors. And then we have public benefit compliance factors that have been outlined prior. If you notice, the last line says the actions contemplated in this authorization shall be subject to approval by the town council, which indicates to me that we can approve this tonight. People will get to work doing whatever. It's going to come back to us and we will go through the process we need to go through in order to move it forward. So, or not, as it may be, okay? But this at least gives us a framework for negotiation. And I certainly will support it tonight.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other discussion? Counselor Anderson.
Okay. I wrote something which I don't typically do because I felt like I really needed to be clear and share my thoughts and opinions on this one. So bear with me, I'm going to read it. I try to make it concise, but you know, brevity is not my specialty. So after giving this fair consideration, I will not be supporting this next step. By supporting it, to me, it would be agreeing that there's justifiable public benefit for the general welfare of the community, and I don't have enough information to prove that to be the case. While I understand many may be enticed by the promise of a downtown and the potential for a community center with a pool, I see this only supporting a subset of the community at best and becoming a Downs downtown and not a Scarborough downtown. I'm not convinced, based on the consultant's report, even with the housing exemption, this vision will succeed without further significant investment from the town beyond the housing exemption. Until further necessary work is done by the Downs and the town, I'm a no. But I think we can take a different path in the interim that moves our council goals forward and brings this conversation back to the forefront at the appropriate time. I agree, Councilor Clichy, with your opening statement about how this has kind of gone into the political realm and we need to move it out. I don't know if I feel like this action is the right next step. So I want to talk a little bit about what I would suggest. So from looking at the work that's been done to date, when we think about the financial impact of the town, we've discussed the potential net positive impact of the town, but we have not taken the time to understand the total cost and investment the town will need to provide to make this a success, and have predominantly focused on the housing exemption. The cost to serve model was identified with weaknesses and I believe needs to be reworked and updated. Some outstanding questions that I have that I think we should all take the time to better understand is what's the required infrastructure and who's footing the bill? Who's going to be managing the green space once it's completed? What is the cost of the community center, the total cost of the community center? What are the key assumptions going into this that are at most risk, and what mitigation efforts would the Downs propose to manage those? What is the fiscal impact of the town if this does not happen? Are impact fees currently optimized to support this effort? When it comes to the community center and the school land, in this request, we are asking to have land reserved for the community center and the school, but by simply reserving the land does not guarantee either of those projects will come to fruition. Both projects will need to go to referendum for voter approval, so we are hedging the benefit, assuming these would both be approved, while also assuming the Downs is the best site for these without first evaluating other alternatives. While they may be critical to activate a downtown, that doesn't mean it is the best deal for Scarborough. Some outstanding questions that I have. What is the request for the community center? To meet that request, how much land do we actually need? What parcels would be made available to us? What would be the additional cost to make these sites ready for use? Are we taking a build or lease approach to align more with the TIF funding strategy that we recently approved? What alternative sites are available in the TIF district that may offer other benefits to the town? Will the Downs agree to a nominal lease given the original analysis done by the Community Center Committee, which showed that the original terms were very disadvantageous financially to the town? I have similar questions for the schools regarding the scope and the total cost of the parcels that would be offered. Additionally, the school building is in a similar position where we don't have the requirements yet. So I think we are reacting too much to the opportunity and not taking the time to understand what the needs are to determine if this is the best opportunity. If there is a consolidated school project, could one of those existing sites be used for a community center instead? What are the benefits of that? For both items, what happens if these projects fail at referendum? What happens with that land? What is the other commitment that is equal to this that we need to ensure that is a good deal for Scarborough if for some reason this falls through? When it comes to housing, I think we all agree diverse housing is another key benefit offered in this proposal. This will allow for more multi-unit housing, condos, and apartments, but I don't think that will address our affordable housing and workforce housing needs given today. We are already at 13.7 of our housing units as multifamily housing, which according to the consultant is good relative to other communities in Maine. At least according to residents from our scientifically valid survey, multifamily dwelling units as proposed are growing too fast. I believe the majority of the community wouldn't want this exemption, even if that meant no downtown. Some questions for consideration. What do we aspire as a town for this type of dwelling unit? What is a good goal for Scarborough, and would this project be taken too far or not far enough? What is the appropriate pace that the community would be comfortable? How is the community defining our income restricted and workforce housing needs? What are they looking for? In our designated moderate and high growth areas, what is the appropriate pace of growth that doesn't put town services at risk? We've talked a lot about intangible benefits that this proposal and the downtown might offer. I think we can all agree that a downtown, big or small, will provide some intangible benefits to the quality of life for some residents in our town. I personally am not convinced, even as proposed, this will be a downtown for all of Scarborough, but the housing exemption will have consequences for all residents. In the consultant's report, this is a complex and unique project with many dependencies for success. Given the consultant's analysis on retail, it's unlikely what was presented in the Downs last iteration is achievable, even with the exemption. When you look at what was provided in the 2018 A Downtown for Scarborough Connecting Scarborough Downs and Oak Hill report, what was provided by the Downtown Committee, and the most recent renderings that we received, this is constantly evolving, and I'm not sure or confident of what we will actually be getting in the end. While I understand there may be some intangible benefits of the downtown, I would like just to take more time to fully evaluate and understand the consequences. Some outstanding questions I have are as follows. Is the current developer qualified in position to deliver, given they have no experience with this type of mixed-use development? What performance conditions, not just design standards, will they be held accountable for if they do not deliver? There will be an impact to traffic. While the TMP will help to mitigate the traffic impacts, what will be the actual impacts to our roads with this exemption, especially considering the Costco may be going in as well? What is the impact to the schools? What is the school's perspective on this and the risks associated with it? We still haven't had the opportunity to talk with them and really understand the impact from their perspective. Do the schools have an adequate absorption plan in place to address it? How many additional trailers will be required to build capacity to support the new students? Infrastructure impact. How will the infrastructure development of this project compete with the current infrastructure needs for existing residents? Who is going to take accountability and responsibility for the infrastructure to enable the downtown? Do we have a commitment that it will not be the town or require additional town investment beyond the current CEA? Access to natural resources and amenities. How is this increase in population being factored into our parks and facilities master plan, which is just about to kick off? Those services also deliver on the quality of life aspects and intangible benefits to the town. What are the consequences for access to fields and natural resources? One unrelated item that also kind of gives me concern is the concept of the library expansion. The library provides excellent services to the community and also enhances the quality of life to our residents. These services are at risk due to the growth and expansion plans and are likely going to be deprioritized for this more risky venture. This is a real defined project with years in the making, where they are also planning to raise millions of dollars to offset taxpayers. I think the prevailing position I'm skipping that conclusion. Okay, I don't think we have enough information. I don't think we have enough information to start drafting terms and conditions to move this along at this time. We are in a position of negotiating strength with this proposal, but we run the risk of going into this a little blind, which is going to impact the outcome for the town in the end. This process has been very dynamic, and I think something we all agreed to support at the forefront. I think we all went into this with the right intentions when the Downs first submitted their application. But at this point, I think we need to reframe our thinking surrounding our actual council goals we agreed to this year and stop letting this project be the center through which our work and decisions are being made. The Downs is surely part of the strategy to advance our goals, but it should not be the strategy, which I think unfortunately we've conflated the two together. For this exemption, I suggest we vote no tonight, put the pencils down on the application, and re-engage in the fall when they have a clear picture of what they plan to deliver, and we have answers to many, if not all, the questions I posed above or before. As a council and community, let's better define what the community center is and determine where may be the best location based on appropriate analysis. Let's allow the school building steering committee to do their work that is already well underway and define their need and work through their site selection process. Let's let them engage as we've described in our CEA to determine if the Downs is truly the best location for the project. Let's do a housing study and understand the real housing needs of our existing residents. Let's reevaluate the cost to serve model so we can look at all growth projects better and more accurately. Let's revisit impact fees and better understand the infrastructure needs that would be required as a result of this ask. Let's allow the Parks and Recs master plan to kick off to understand how growth impacts these important areas that also influence the quality of life. Let's better engage the public to better understand their concerns of growth and make sure we are developing policies with that in mind, as we agreed to by digging deeper into the survey that we recently received. Many, if not all of these, tie to our goals this year and advance and can advance separate from this exemption and will better inform us in making this decision. Rather than allowing this exemption to dominate our agenda in time, let's do the work needed so when the Downs comes back in the fall, we are ready. Let's vote no, not right now, and take a different path. Time is on our side on this one. Let's use it. We committed to that when this first started. Let's not change the course. If by chance this does move forward tonight, I do want to emphasize that we do need to put together a proactive engagement plan with the public that optimizes transparency and generates public engagement. Let's not wait for them to come to us. We need to go to them. Let's make sure we paint an honest picture for the public, what this is, what it isn't, and what the pros, cons, and consequences are, so they can let us know what they really think.
Thank you, sir. Counselor Johnson.
I'm gonna borrow a prop, if you don't mind. When I ran for the council, I ran on 2 issues: growth, communication. I haven't changed my view at all. And when I ran, I actually thought I could get into this chamber and go, no. And that's what I've just heard. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I'm a firm believer, if you have information you need to do, you cannot gather that information without a conversation. That's all this action is doing for me. This is no approval of this exemption. This is moving it forward to get all the questions are very valid questions. We do have a consultant that can answer an awful lot of what you ask. We need to engage the consultant. You just can't say no. No guarantee for me, I'm a yes or a no. I don't know enough. But how do I get to where I know enough to feel I can make a responsible decision? It's through engagement and conversation. And to me, that's all this action does. There's no promises anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to respond.
I'm just going to try to give everybody a chance to speak before we go around again. Counselor Seiler.
I can go. So Counselor Anderson, you bring up a lot of information and a lot of good points. I respect all of the information that you're hoping to gather. For me, this negotiation is the next logical step in that discussion. This discussion started taking place before I even joined the council. And we do dedicate a lot of time to this topic, but to answer all the questions that you just posed is also going to take a lot of time. And so for me, it doesn't really matter in the sense that we should say no tonight so that we can gather information, because I think we can gather information while negotiations is taking place, especially once the terms of the contract are more closely defined, then I know what my questions are. Whereas right now we have 800 questions and maybe some of them won't end up being relevant to the actual contract that comes out of the negotiation. And so that for me is the cart before the horse. Like I have a hard time speaking to something that I haven't even seen in written form yet. And so for that reason, I am in favor of this next step and I will be supporting this tonight.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead. I don't want us to have a tit for tat, right? So everybody gets a chance to speak, and I'll say my part now and then probably call the vote. I hate to jump back 20 years, but the idea for a town center isn't new. It was part of the comprehensive plan back in 2006. It was converted from that vision into an ordinance in 2012 or thereabouts. A developer came and bought the land that had this specific zone defined for them that calls for a town center and placemaking, places to gather. Didn't mention a community center, but it showed one on a picture. So this isn't new. The town has had this out there. We've sort of been incentivizing it or trying to draw a user in that could help us realize that vision. The way our GMO currently works, which I'm going to say Ken and I wrote a large part of it, they can't build a single building. They can't get a single building in the town center permitted because they are restricted to 44 units a year through the GMO, and every one of these buildings has between 45 and 60 units. And maybe that was by design by them, but that's a fact. So when they say they can't execute on the downtown vision without some sort of leeway, they are not lying. They're not making that up. That's just a fact. Back to the GMO. When we rewrote it, we made some pretty big changes, right? It used to be that if you were building a 1-bedroom unit, that would count as a fraction of unit, a 2-bedroom, another fraction. If you're building homes, they count it as full units. We got rid of all that, right? We didn't increase the number of units. It was 135 before, it's 144 now. So we drastically reduced the allowable construction that can happen under the GMO. But we created another mechanism where there used to be a reserve pool where we could kind of slide, hey, if the council just takes action to put some more permits in the pool, then the planning board can give them to somebody. There's no real discussion about the big projects, right? And this was a conscious decision. We wanted to make sure as a council, we're having these conversations about the big projects in town. There's pros and cons to them, but it should be the people, in my opinion. And I may revert back to, I may change my mind on this. I'm kind of new. I feel like 7 reasonable people can make educated and well reasoned decisions about the growth and development that happens in town. And that's what the new GMO does. And that's why we're talking about it. And that's why we're getting some engagement and some misinformation. That's all part of it, right? So we're telling you where we're at, and you now tell us what you think. If you don't like it, great, ask questions. Sorry, Doug, just one more moment. Okay, I didn't write anything down, so I think I'm gonna call it at that. This is a step. You can't say that we're rushing it. You can't say that we're not doing it in full purview of the public. And we can't say that we're going to support it. But I think it's time to see if there's something that we can support. So with that, if somebody wants to call the vote, I'll entertain it. Everybody's had an opportunity to speak.
No, I think we should have some additional discussion on this. There were some points raised about permits and GMO. I supported those GMO revisions, but what was done at that time and what's being proposed here by this act is to basically grant permits without doing the work, without doing the study and analysis to decide if that's appropriate. Bear with me a minute. So when we revise the GMO, the Downs only gets 40% of the 144, and that number is 44 units, right?
30%.
30%. Yeah. So we're proposing, what they're proposing is 430, what we're proposing, indicating we would agree to 430 permits over some time frame. 5 years, take 5 years. If you take 430 divided by 5, was that 86 a year? What's the math on that? Or 4 years was originally. What is it in the document?
It's 86 a year. Oh, you mean with this?
Yeah, it's
Proposal,
yes.
it's 86 a year.
So it's 86 a year. We basically, so if you add the 86 to the 44, which is what we're allowing, that would give them 130 permits, or basically 90% of the 144 permits that are allowed each year, right?
No, because we're talking about exemptions, not permits. So the permits count towards your 10-year average, which increases the amount that you have to allow the next year. Doing it through an exemption, you don't count them. So that's the rationale for doing that. It doesn't compound.
And when we did that revision to the GMO, we didn't, there was no application for an exemption yet. This is the first one, the very first one from our partners and a CEO of 30 years, 3 years into a 30-year agreement. And they're asking for an exemption, and we're gladly saying, here's the number, but we have things we want to see, okay? And they're vaguely referenced. They're not specific in any way.
You know what? You just triggered what I was going to say
Well,
when you rose your hand. So we have to think about the cost of inaction, right? So if they can't create this vision of a town center, there's a lot of other things that they can do by right, which means that they can, and one of them is build houses or build three-bedroom townhomes, and they can build 20 per acre. And for the 90 acres that we're talking about exempting 430, they could build 1,800 homes there, right? And they don't have to do a town center. They don't have to do land for a community center or for school. And the impact of that on the town's finances is significant and substantial. So it's not all one-sided on this, right? You have to consider, and we have a good example of this. Mussey Road came forward with a contract zone proposal, right? They were going to build 3 buildings on a corner of the lot. They were going to give 35 acres to the Scarborough Land Trust. They were going to build a parking lot to help solve the congestion on Gorham Road. And we didn't have any support for it. So now they're doing what they can do by right, which is going to be 12 buildings instead of 3 spread out over time, or maybe they'll latch onto some exemptions. But I don't know that that's a better the fact is we didn't have to opine on it. We didn't have to say yes or no, so it's easier for us. That doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And I guess I want to make sure that we're cognizant of that with this one, that the inaction has consequences as much as action does. Okay.
So I'm not proposing inaction, but what I am proposing, we follow our own process. And we can even see with doing that, there's some flexibility with it, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we should use that flexibility to our advantage. What we've done here is we jumped ahead to what's essentially a term sheet for an outline of an agreement that's not been negotiated. It's not been approved, by the council. Even this action doesn't approve that. You've said, we've heard that tonight already. It's not done yet. So if that's the case, why are we putting this forward to vote on? We should go back to eating our own dog food and following the process, which is the contract zone amendment process, which has 3 steps, unlike this one that has 1 step and a vote, kaboom, and all you need is 4 votes. Why don't we do that?
Don, you may recall that when this came forward in October, and then there was a change in leadership, I did ask you as chair of ordinance to investigate defining a process for exemption requests and modeling it after the contract zone process. The fact is, we have not done that. And so we're winging it. This seemed to make sense to me and to a majority of the council, so that's fine. That's why we're.
So you're saying we cannot use our own contract zone amendment process, even though this would require a contract zone amendment in order
It
to.
does not
approve?
require a contract zone amendment.
It does not.
This is not a contract zone. This is an exemption to our growth management ordinance.
But why
There's a parallel, however.
an ugly one?
I think it's a very wise one. It's the public benefit parallel,
Yeah.
but the process is not spelled out. I think the council, when it comes to having a finite proposal to consider for in the end, I think you can layer all sorts of process. You could add additional public hearings. You could have it mirror the contract zone if you wished. That's not been defined or discussed.
So the only thing I'd say is using this as a substitute for some other process, I think is not deliberating. It is not deliberate, it's neither deliberate nor deliberating. And I think by virtue of that, we are not fulfilling our role, which is to represent the public in this. We've heard feedback from the public that they're concerned about growth. I'll quote Mr. Johnson's favorite survey. That was the #1 thing they're concerned about, growth and development. Oh, by the way, the #1 thing they're interested in is not a downtown, it's a community center and pool. And so, we have a partner in this by definition of a 30-year CEA that was negotiated by the town manager and one councilor. It was not the whole council involved in that. And I can remember presentations at the Downs, at the stadium, when we questioned two counselors at that time who have gone on to hold state office, and they said they didn't know anything about it. They were not engaged in the process. Why are we following that same pattern here? I'm very concerned about it. I think it's only going to raise additional questions. And we're by definition of the CEA, we've got a partner we have to deal with. Are they, they have no track record in terms of building this type of thing.
Councilor Caterina.
Can I just finish my statement here? I'm in the middle of a sentence. If just
Finish your
bear with
sentence.
me. And even our negotiator said, why, I asked him a direct question. Would you select these folks to build a downtown center of the type that you've seen in terms of a very rough sketch plan? And he said, yes. And I said, well, why would you do that? Because they've done everything so far under the agreement that you've asked them to do. They have no track record of this. This is equivalent to somebody buying a house, selecting a builder without even seeing the plans, not even seeing pricing. And that just doesn't work for me.
Councilor Caterina.
Mr. Chair, I request that we move the question.
Very good. What that means is we're going to call the vote now. Tony, would you call the roll?
Counselor Seither,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
No.
Counselor Paul Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
No.
Counselor Ken Johnson,
Yes.
and Chairman Clucci.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the agenda for our special meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second.
All in favor? And opposed? Tony, would you call the roll?
Counselor Seiler,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson.
No.
Counselor Paul Johnson.
Yes.
Counselor Katarina.
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
No.
Counselor Ken Johnson,
Yes.
and Chairman Calucci.
Yes,
Motion passes. Thank you.
Take a breath.
thank you. all. Yeah, I'm going to call a 5-minute recess and then we'll come back and we will start our work on charter review. Hi, welcome back, everybody. This is now, we're moving into our Wednesday, March 9th, 2022 Scarborough Town Council Workshop, which is a review of the Charter Committee recommendations. This is our first review. I'll call this meeting to order, and we'll note that all councilors are currently present. And the item we're here for is to review and discuss the final report from the Ad hoc Charter Committee. A little bit of background, the committee completed their work middle of last year and did report out to the town council. I think collectively we felt there wasn't enough time to properly digest it in time for last November's referendum. So we decided to carry it forward into this year's goals and try to accomplish it in time for this November's referendum. This is the first of what will probably be a couple of different sessions. And I've asked Councilor Katarina to help coordinate with town staff to lead us through this initial exercise. I'm going to open it up before I pass it to Councilor Katarina, unless you want to do an intro to public comment. So if there's anybody here that would like to, and sometimes we do this at the end of workshops, I thought it would be beneficial to hear up front. If there's any members of the public that have anything they'd like to add relative to the Charter Committee's work.
Nothing here.
Seeing none. Councilor Katarina.
Yeah, I want to thank the chair for putting this into a special workshop, because it is time for us to begin to look at and review and make a decision as to which elements of the charter will move forward to the voters in November. I did do a brief article that will be, and I'm looking at John, when's it going to appear, John? Next Wednesday. And I wrote it in that vein that will refer back to this, so that everyone should look, you know, in the leader and probably on our email news too, for more information on exactly a little bit about what the process is and was and why, and references to the charter itself. I do want to start by thanking all the members, the citizen members who met and did a lot of work. They went from the very first page, first word, all the way through to the very last page and the last word, and reviewed, and we broke it down into different groups and came up with the recommendations that you're going to hear tonight. So I do want to thank all of them who put in that time and in getting that done. So I guess without any further ado, we will go to Mr. Gallagher, who's put together really nice slides for us. And again, I will remind counselors that tonight's not the night to vote on anything. This is what we came up with, if you may recall, or maybe you haven't seen it yet, but here it is. And part of me, as the teacher in me, would like to give you a homework assignment that says, you know, what the next time we bring this up for whatever, that you have thought about where your top 3 or 4 elements of the recommendations are. Okay, so there you go.
Thank you, Councilor Katarina. So I think just to talk about what the objectives of the workshop, to echo some of Councilor Katarina's comments. The goal of tonight is just to go through what the proposed changes are to the charter. You'll notice that some are really de minimis changes. They're wording edits. There's some updates, really not all that consequential. Other sections, there are some fairly substantive changes proposed. And so we're going to work through the changes in sequential order. So some will obviously be de minimis, and we can move right on once the proposal is understood. Others, I think there's some opportunity for either myself or Tom or Tony to expand on what the background was, what the intention of the changes were, just so the council comes away after this evening with a good idea of kind of a summarized discussion from the Charter Review Committee.
Mr. Gallagher,
yeah,
if
please.
I could ask, and what the chair would like to do, do you want questions as we go along, or do you want to wait till the end?
I think that we should probably, questions, I think we should make sure we kind of understand what the changes are. I think that, sort of a healthy debate on the merits of it, I think is what we can either come back to either this evening or a future session, but this is really just to kind of lay the foundation.
I should also say, I think we'll do our best to recall what the conversation in the committee was and not inject our own opinions. That sometimes is difficult. I will say there's a complete record of those proceedings between meeting minutes. All of the proceedings were taped, even our subcommittees. And so it may behoove you on a particular topic to go back and reread the minutes or look at the tape and really understand the dialogue, because I'm sure I've forgotten some of those pieces. But we'll do our best to represent what those conversations were like and why.
So just again, the background that I think we've already touched on, this goes back to October of 2020 when this committee was formed. Back in November of 2020, the council appointed members of the committee. I believe there are 7 citizen members. There are 2 counselors, and there's also a representative from the BOE, I believe was the rough composition with some staff support. We actually have the chair of the Charter Review Committee in attendance this evening. He did issue a report back in June of 21. So there has been some time that has passed since this committee work wrapped up. But to Tom's point, all of those, again, excellent documentation, excellent minutes from every meeting. And really right from the start, we have good records of all those discussions. So as I already said, there are some proposed amendments that range in significance. The more substantive ones really come in Article 5, Article 8, and Article 9. So budget, nominations, and elections, and then referendum, initiative, and recall, including the title of Article 9. Really some de minimis changes to Articles 2, 4, and 7, and 10, which again will be very apparent once you go through. We did want to note that there were some additional items, and again, the chair of the committee, Nick McGee, did do a nice job articulating some issues that got some fairly substantial discussion that ultimately weren't brought forward, either by virtue of not having majority support of the committee. I think there was even one vote that was a 4-4 tie. So again, some support there. Or it was determined to be outside the purview of a charter review committee. And again, there is a distinction to be made between a charter review commission, which are elected members, I believe elected members from the community that have a greater authority to make substantive changes to things like form of government. So one of the issues that did come up in the discussion of the charter review committee was looking at the concept of moving to a ward-based elective system rather than just at-large councilors, and that was determined to likely be a substantive issue outside of the purview of a committee. So again, some fair discussion, some interest. They never took a vote on that because it was the conversation was frankly stymied by the fact that it really felt like it was outside the purview. There is some additional information on that in the report from the chair. So the first change here, again, this is just a formatting change. It was moving what was previously in section 806 for surrounding term limits to Article 2, which is town council. So there's no change in language or intention here. It's simply a formatting change. But what we will provide to the full council is a red line version of the charter. So you'll see all these pieces and you'll see where in Article 806 that was struck through. So we have all of those track changes. This one again is fairly straightforward. There was some discussion among the Charter Review Committee about the compensation for our elected officials. So they are proposing to increase that to a livable wage of $2,500 a year. And the similar change was recommended with the BOE, which we'll see later on in the document. Section 212. So this is talking about record keeping. I will say that one of the themes that really developed out of the committee in their discussions was really an interest in accessibility of information and record keeping, transparency in government, and things like notice. So you'll see a general theme around if you can record it, if you can tape it, if you can broadcast it, you should do it. And I think we even saw some of that work at the time. Former Councillor Gleistein also had similar discussions with other documents outside of the charter. Again, I think 302, there was some suggestion that we should bolster those requirements Also keeping in mind that all this work kicked off during COVID, so everything was remote, everything was recorded. And so I think you'll see a natural suggestion that that's something we should really take a hard look at. Again, this is another additional notice, so moving the public hearings to a 14-day notice period as opposed to the 7. Again, we do have, and I know Tony can speak to this, we do have some ordinances that require a 10-day notice now. So it's just suggesting that more advanced notice should occur prior to public hearings, and that, just modernizing the charter for recognizing that websites are a primary vehicle for information now. So let's make sure that that stays up to date. Again, talking about record keeping, wanting to expand the requirement for the clerk to maintain records of ad hoc committees and boards, and making sure it's consistent with the administrative code and law. Again, these are all really de minimis, in my opinion, de minimis changes. Moving on to 406, again, modeling the same increase in compensation for the Board of Education to keep pace. And then we move on to budget, which is really the first area where there's really some fairly substantial changes proposed to how we do it. And I think Mr. Hall would like to make some comments on this.
Yeah, there was a theme that emerged among the committee, and I happen to sit on the subcommittee that dealt with this article, so I'm quite familiar with their discussion, really around bolstering the requirements of the budget process in terms of what sort of information is provided. The charter is quite detailed in terms of the different components of a proposed budget, really for the value of certainly the town council, but also the public to appreciate our financial condition, so on and so forth. One of the areas that they saw was light in their view was really around the issue of capital assets. And so the intent here is really to add into the charter, in addition to all the other requirements that already exist, some additional information around kind of the condition of our physical assets. So that's a theme that I think you'll see repeat a little further on. I think the language kind of speaks for itself in that regard, but this is nested in context with all of those other requirements kind of as part of the budget submission. I think it will be easier when you see these changes in context. You'll be able to see how it fits along with the other language that exists. So I wouldn't characterize that as substantive necessarily. It's just an additional requirement to the point of transparency and better information available. Next, also in this section 502, this is 502 subsection 1.2. Again, the theme of capital investment. I would really view this codifying essentially what we do already. We already have a 5-year capital plan. We had a lot of conversation. I really described how we do it, and they really saw the value and wanted to make sure that that continued. So this is really a codification in many respects of the practice that we already do. The second part of this, however, really speaks to something that we've gotten away from, which is in the past, we've done some funding of outside agencies, social service agencies. That's limited to I'll say the Land Trust and Project Grace are the only two outside of town government that we provide some level of financial support toward. In the past, there were dozens that we provided support for. And I think this was simply, if we ever consider that again, you line item them. So there's very clear transparency as to who we're giving how much to. It was all wrapped up into a single line item, so it wasn't always clear as to who's getting what. So I wouldn't characterize either one of these as substantive either. Again, I don't expect that we'll get back heavily into that practice of providing financial support through our budget to non-governmental agencies. John, you have a question?
I do. I hate to step back. 502.1.1. What does that look like? Which shall include an assessment of the condition of the fiscal assets owned, operated, managed, and otherwise utilized by the town for the ability. Can you help me with that one?
I'm not sure if I can.
Okay.
I'm just relating the kind of the interest on the part of the committee. It's an excellent question because I'll be the one that's tasked with complying with this. So if you consider this, we ought to talk further so we are all on the same page in terms of what the expectation is.
I can offer, I think if I, again, recall the conversation, there was certainly we have a list of, insured properties, property and casualty, we're obligated to have that. I think the question was, are there going to be additional financial commitments to maintain those structures that we don't otherwise account for? So if we have a facility that has a aging roof that's going to cost $80,000, I think they're looking for a contemporaneous update and status of our facilities, not simply that they're there and what their value is, but being more, I think, cognizant to what the condition is, so they can better. I believe that was in the subcommittee that my staff.
And in some part, we do that with the 5-year CIP, but I think this idea is a further outward look.
I can picture it a little better now. Thank you.
So I think we've moved past that one, Liam. So further on in section 502, this is 502.1.5. Again, just kind of cleaning up some language, fairly self-explanatory. I don't know that we need to dwell on that. This was the subject of some fairly detailed discussion among the subcommittee and then the full committee itself. And this has been a subject of some discussion in past councils and from the podium as well, in terms of what happens in the event of the council failing to adopt a budget within the prescribed timeframe. And essentially what the committee is recommending is that it's referencing the current budget. So it's essentially last year's budget would be the budget that would be used for the non-education portion. So the town portion or municipal portion of the budget until such time the council passes a new one. And then with respect to what happens on the school side, which is more often than not, certainly part of that consideration, there's a reference because really state law provides in this regard. And I can't sit here tonight and tell you what state law says in that regard. But I know our lawyers would rather us, reference the applicable state law to the extent that it may change over time. And I would expect you'd want to know what the answer is. What does that actually mean in practicality? And I apologize for not doing that research before tonight, but I think you understand the intent here. And I've got some certainly opinions around this, but I don't think tonight is the time to offer those. But so then I think we move back to Liam at this point.
Sure. So 703, again, just a minor change regarding Board of Appeals, making sure just clearly identifying as the Zoning Board of Appeals. I guess this is, I do want to note that we have referred this document to legal counsel. There's nothing that's glaring, that's unlawful or impossible. There are some suggestions that our town attorney had. This was one of them. Board of Appeals is referenced in other parts of our ordinances.
Chapter 405 references simply the Board of Appeals.
So just some clarity there, but there are a few other issues where in the event there's interest in furthering the proposed change by the council, then we'll want to make sure that whatever suggestions legal counsel has made with regard to that issue, we bring to the forefront and consider at that time. This is, I think, Tony perhaps can speak to this, but in brief, proposing to move municipal elections from November to June in the election of town council and Board of Education members. So this would be a fairly substantial change.
It was brought forward by a member of the Board of Education. It was due to the fact that the elections being held in November, they felt it disrupted the board's progress to move forward in selection of boards. And so the committee voted to move them both, recommend them both to be moved to June.
Yeah, so I guess as I recall that the discussion really started and came from the Board of Education side of things. The committee in conversation thought, well, what about town council? It would be strange for us to do one in November, one in June. So I think the opinion of the committee was let's at least align our local election and bring them all to June. That's kind of, it happened in those two steps, as I recall. Just a final point I'd make, and I think the chair of the committee notes this in his notes. If this is to pass, there needs to be further discussion around how your terms, there's some further work to be done in terms of understanding how that transition occurs as you're all on different staggered terms.
So how are we handling discussion on that? You want to go item by item, or you're going to ask for that at the end after Tom runs through?
We're almost at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
I made a note to come back
Yep.
to that one. Thanks.
No, we expect this one will garner some discussion.
The section 802 around nomination simply reflects moving back that timeline to a June election. So that's the intention there. 806, this is the portion that was moved to Article 2, again around term limits. They thought the committee felt it was better suited to our section 201. So Article 9, again, I'm sure Tom or
I can
Tony has
speak
something
to
to
it,
say.
Billy.
Yep, sure.
Yeah, so I think I advocated for the name change of Article 9 to include voter rights. And in my mind, that really better evokes what the spirit of that article is, which is it's the different powers of the people, if you will, whether it's to approve bonding or recall counselors or BOE members. So I think it helps just suggest what lies within the article. Particularly this 903.1 provides detail and further detail and requirements for a recall petition that it has, I believe, 4 different potential, I guess, violations or reasons for seeking a recall. And as opposed to a simple statement with no clarity or requirements that exist today. And this did garner a fair amount of discussion, but I think in the end, the committee voted perhaps unanimously. I don't know exactly, but I think there was a collective agreement that perhaps further clarity would be helpful here. So it doesn't change the rights of the voters to do so. It just adds a little more clarity as to the petition process to be followed if they wish. Liam, do you want to speak to the next?
Sure. So this is again around the timing of that, just some changes to the language, which I thought was more apt. I don't think there's anything
Well,
substantive.
the may and the shall could be impactful potentially, but I think it just makes it very clear as to who can circulate petitions.
This is another issue that I think Tom's very happy to speak to, but essentially an increase in the amount required to go to referendum for expenses.
Yes, it does. And this section has been the subject of a lot of consideration through the years. Nearly every year, we have to look back at this language and understand what requires voter approval and what doesn't. Keep in mind that this process, charter review process, fell on the heels shortly thereafter. The community center committee had concluded its work, and there was talk of a multi-million-dollar lease that we were contemplating. And a fair question in that conversation was, well, do the voters get a bite at that apple? So I think the committee wanted to, was aware of that and wanted to include that, yes, a long-term financial commitment of the town, whether it's borrowing money or signing a lease that commits us financially, should require. And so that's essentially what this does. There's kind of 3 things this language does. One, it increases the amount from 400 to 600,000, and there was a fair amount of discussion about the amount, and it's probably worth looking back at because it started at a much higher number, as I recall, but that was the compromise position. And then it breaks it down into 2 pieces, and that requirement of that threshold of 600 applies either for issuing general obligation bonds or committing to a lease that's longer than 5 years. That in total cost would again be beyond that threshold. So we struggle with this language. It still probably is a little clunky, but hopefully you can get the sense of what the intent is.
I just have a quick question for you, Tom. So I think TIFs have become a more recent new thing for us. And I'm not sure if the committee was as familiar with TIFs as we are now. Does this language, or is the intent of this language that it would be inclusive of TIF revenues?
No, a TIF is neither borrowing nor leasing, in my opinion.
Okay. So I think that's just something I think as a council we might want to deliberate with what we just recently did with the TIFs when we're kind of talking about allocating big investments. Maybe not for tonight, but if this is going to continue to be deliberated, that might be something we should consider adding for clarity or discuss if it has merit.
I actually think the answer to your question is yes. I think he was asking I think it sounded like you were asking, should we vote on a TIF? But I think you're saying TIF revenues, I would say yes, they'll still fall under this. Yes. Expenditure
Oh,
TIF,
maybe I
yes.
asked the question wrong.
I don't believe so, the way this language is proposed. The existing language really speaks to the appropriation. It does not, there was a bit of a
Oh, because of the-
misunderstanding. Some interpreted the existing language to say any bonding beyond $400,000 requires. The actual language says any appropriation, regardless of source of funds, requires.
That's what, right. So if we use TIF revenue, that'd be appropriating TIF revenue.
This language strikes that language that hangs on appropriation. It speaks to the two scenarios,
Question.
issuance of general obligation bonds or signing a lease.
In this process,
I
it's
still-
still not too late in the process for a counselor, individual counselor, actually bringing forward a suggested recommendation for change to the charter. Is that correct? That can still happen.
Yeah, you decide what language, which issues and what questions you ask of the public. So this is your starting point. It's fairly far along, but it's a starting point.
Continue on. This is the last one. That's it. It's pretty straightforward. Again, it speaks to conflict of interest, and this was an additional piece under general provisions. Again, once you see all of Article 10, you'll see there's only 3 bullet points there. So within the context, but this was another interest of the committee, speaking to conflict of interest with elected officials.
Yeah, I think it falls under that theme of kind of open, good government. That they're not just elected members, but even appointed members really should adhere to the same conflict of interest issues. Not that nothing prompted this, to my knowledge. I don't recall an example brought up, but it just felt like a good thing to do on their part.
So, I mentioned that you could do his homework to do, to take the sections that you feel are really important. And then, and if you want something changed or addressed, to bring it back to a subsequent meeting, which I'm going to leave up to the chair and vice chair, working with the manager as to what the next steps will be. But I think it would be really good for people to dive into this. And, the charter is the most important document that we work with in this town. It's like our constitution. It sets us up. So I really feel strongly that as town councilors, you should, I have my own personal copy of the chart. I've been hauling around since 2013. You should feel the marks of writing and whatever in it. But it does help you to understand sometimes too, the staging behind things or how it happens. So that's my opinion as to what we should do next, but I leave it up to others, and you have someone with their hand raised, Mr. Chair.
I just have a question about like timeline and process, like do we have a specific target date in mind of when we want this voted on, wrapped up, and, because I know it has to be on the ballot.
I'm going to defer to Tony.
I mentioned to Liam that it should be done by
End of July.
end of July.
July 20th is when we would need to have first reading and public hearing first in order to make it for the November ballot.
Okay.
Just for the general public and myself. So after we vet this and we decide what we'd like to bring forward, what's the process to take that paragraph we were just reading to have it a bullet item on a referendum so the voter understands it enough to either affirm or deny? How's that process done?
Don't have the Secretary of State do it.
Well, it's not unlike the slides that are shown here tonight. Presumably there'll be, a smaller, they'll all be individual ballot questions. So it's not provided, it's not sent as a package, up or down.
So it's not just a line item, it could be a full paragraph.
Correct. I think you need to give it context so people understand what does it mean in the context of, the other wording in that section.
The town attorney as well.
Yeah, and we might categorize them. So we might have like one page that deals with similar, maybe non-substantive changes as a group and let them vote on that. And then the big ones probably need to have their own page and description.
Yeah, a description. of
And,
what-
and then we need to kind of be a little bit cognizant of what's too much to expect of the voters. Like, right, can we put 13 questions in front of them, or is there?
Let me just take a look.
Because remember, it's a gubernatorial election too. And you've got, you know, legislative, you've got.
About the school budget as well.
November.
Oh, November, no.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Tody's looking up to see if we can actually put an explanatory note. I believe we have in the past.
I think you can.
If the language isn't kind of clear on its own, you may.
Yes.
So that's something we're gonna have to get to. Once we, I think, as a council, come to the things that we
Right.
want to move forward, we'll use some professionals to try to help.
Yeah.
Craft it in a way that's understandable.
It's the council, according to the charter, the council can move everything forward or move nothing forward. I don't propose doing either, you know, but let's figure out what makes the best sense, so.
Counselor Hamel and then Anderson.
So I just want to make a couple comments. One is, this is a little bit of a carryover from a prior administration. So as a representative of that, I wanted to apologize to the committee and also to the council for it taking time. We, for whatever reason, this has been on the queue for a while and now, you know, it's finally getting to us. So you know, my apologies for that. But I did want to also thank the committee for how diligent they were in their work. And now that it's kind of coming back to us, you know, also an apology for, I mean, I'm glad that we have a couple of folks here this evening, but it was fairly short notice that I know it's just a workshop and just a preliminary stuff, but, you know, we look forward to folks attending, you know, and chiming in, you know, to comment on the work that you've done. So the final thing is, I think there are several substantive changes. I think Councilor Ken Johnson referenced one. I mean, certainly the one on the timing of the elections is a big one. I know that is something the Board of Ed likes, but it does, I think, completely miss the issue of voter participation, which is normally much better in the fall. So I look forward to more discussion on that and also to the one on financials and the leasing and the shift from appropriation to capitalization. So.
There was a summary on the ballot explaining.
Yeah, so just from a process question, right? Like we need to look at the feedback. And again, I also want to thank the charter committee because I think they did a fantastic job. There's some areas that I just want to think a little bit more about that they put forward that I'm sure we all are kind of thinking about, but then there were also some areas that weren't in there that I just want to raise tonight, just for thoughts and consideration down the road was in 215.1 for the audit. My question is more the date that we asked for that audit to be delivered by, because it seems like it might not be feasible. And so to set proper expectations with the public, what would be a more feasible date for delivering that audit? Because I know that comes up all the time of, you know, the charter, it says by December 30th, but I know there's more into the process that goes into it that 6 months post the end of the fiscal year might not be feasible. So I think that's something that we might need to think about. And then maybe more just something that somebody maybe needs to double check was, I know we made changes to the long range planning committee in terms of you know, I think in our policy, what the makeup is of that. But I don't know if that's reflected in the charter update perhaps, and they probably need to be one and the same. I don't know if they are. I didn't pull it up to look at it, but I just know we made some changes and those changes I don't think were reflected. I didn't see any redlining in this. That just makes me assume that maybe there might be some inconsistencies between the two that we might need to fix.
Everybody's head's spinning. So I like Counselor Katarina's suggestion to sit on this a little bit. And I think Ken and I will probably pull you for items that either you want to dive deeper into, maybe bring some committee members, or we can try to pull up the relevant videos or minutes that you absolutely want to support or that you don't think belong here. And hopefully that'll help us narrow in on you know, what exactly we're going to move to the voters. Is that amenable? Okay, you can change your mind.
I certainly know you're all capable of having your own thoughts and discussion and deliberation, but the group that you assembled was really tremendous. And I assure you, I think you benefit from hearing their debate and dialogue around these issues as well. It might be very helpful and thought provoking. So if there are things that you really land on, Jody and I and Lena can help focus your attention on which meetings to look at rather than, you know.
There's a long list of meetings. I did peek at
There
that.
are.
I watched every one.
In prep for today, huh?
No, while they were happening.
Well, thank you both for coming and for doing all the work. It's really massive effort. So it's appreciated. Any other discussion? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody and staff for helping us get this kicked off again. So look forward to working on it more. With that, I'm going to close this workshop and we are adjourned.